Case 10, Molly Boys, East London's ruthless young crew in the heart of East London. A gang known as the Molly Boys grew from a small group of teenagers into one of the most feared criminal crews in the city. Their name came from Somali because many of their early members were from Somali families. But over time, they welcomed boys from all backgrounds who wanted power, money, and respect. They built their empire on the housing estates of Walthamstow, Newham, and Hackney, turning ordinary neighborhoods into battlegrounds for kids growing up there. The Molly Boys weren't just a rumor, they were the group you either feared, avoided, or joined. The Molly Boys started like many modern gangs, running small drug deals and protecting their turf with violence. But it didn't take long before they moved into a much bigger game. They became heavily involved in county lines operations, where young gang members were sent out of London to sell drugs in smaller towns and cities. This gave the Molly Boys control far beyond their own streets. Vulnerable teenagers were recruited, often groomed with gifts and promises, only to find themselves trapped in dangerous situations where saying no wasn't an option. The Molly Boys gained a reputation for being organized and ruthless, acting more like a business than just a street gang. Violence became their trademark. Rivals and even innocent people were caught up in terrifying attacks. The Molly Boys weren't afraid to carry large knives and even firearms to send a message. In one case, they were linked to a brutal stabbing in a busy London street, shocking the community with how young the attackers were. Residents reported feeling like prisoners in their own homes, scared to walk through certain estates once the Molly Boys had claimed them. Videos and music linked to drill culture began spreading their name, glamorizing their violent lifestyle and pushing their reputation even further. For young people looking for belonging or respect, the Molly Boys looked untouchable, but police couldn't ignore them. As their crimes escalated, the authorities launched major operations to break the gang's power. Undercover surveillance, raids at dawn, and long investigations began targeting their leaders. Dozens of arrests followed, and courts handed out long sentences for drug trafficking, violence, and organized crime. Police described the Molly Boys as one of the most dangerous youth gangs in East London, saying their mix of business-like planning and shocking violence made them stand out from other crews. Still, the story of the Molly Boys doesn't end with prison bars. For many in East London, their rise shows how quickly gangs can take control when young people feel they have no opportunities outside crime. The Molly Boys left behind a legacy of fear, broken families, and ruined futures. Their tale is a warning of how dangerous youth gangs can grow, not only for their enemies, but for the communities they come from. Case 9, the Richardson Gang, London's torture gang of the 1960s and the 1960s. When London's underworld was filled with colorful but dangerous characters, one group stood out for their cruelty, the Richardson Gang. Led by brothers Charlie and Eddie Richardson, they earned the chilling nickname the Torture Gang. While other criminals made money through robberies or smuggling, the Richardsons made sure fear was their most powerful weapon. Their reputation wasn't built just on violence, it was built on terrifying torture methods that made even hardened gangsters afraid of crossing them. The Richardson brothers came from South London, an area where poverty and crime often went hand in hand. By the early 1960s, they had built a gang that controlled illegal gambling, protection rackets, and fraud. But unlike others who tried to keep their violence hidden, the Richardsons used it as their signature. They wanted everyone in London's underworld to know what would happen if you didn't pay your debts or if you dared to betray them. Their torture sessions became the stuff of legend. Victims were dragged into basement punishment rooms where the Richardsons or their men would use pliers to pull out teeth, force electric shocks through chairs, or even nail people to the floor. Some victims had their toes crushed with pliers or were beaten until they couldn't walk. These stories spread like wildfire, giving the gang unmatched control. People paid up quickly, not just because they owed money, but because they knew the price of disobedience could be life-changing pain. Their empire grew quickly, with links to corrupt businessmen and criminals across the city. They weren't as publicly glamorous as the Cray twins, their famous rivals from East London. But many insiders whispered that the Richardsons were far more terrifying, where the Crays preferred image and respect. The Richardsons ruled with raw fear, but their brutality couldn't last forever. In 1966, the gang's luck turned when police raided one of their torture sessions in full swing. Victims testified in court, describing in gruesome detail the punishments they endured. The trials shocked Britain, with newspapers dubbing them the torture gang. Witnesses told of electricity, hammers, and pliers being used like weapons of war. The public, already fascinated by gangsters, now saw just how dark London's underworld could be. In the end, the law caught up with the Richardsons. Charlie was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and Eddie received 10 years. Their empire collapsed overnight, and the reign of terror came to an end. Yet the legend of the Richardson gang still lingers as one of the darkest chapters in British crime history. For many, they represented the side of organized crime that wasn't glamorous or stylish. It was ugly, cruel, and unforgettable. Case 8. Peaky Blinders. Birmingham's notorious gang with style and fear long before the TV show made them famous. The Peaky Blinders were a real street gang who ruled Birmingham in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They weren't just troublemakers hanging around pubs. They were an organized criminal group who controlled entire neighborhoods with violence, threats, and their own strange sense of style. The gang took their name from the fashion of wearing flat caps with razor blades sewn into the brims, giving them both a weapon and a signature look that terrified people on the streets. The Peaky Blinders rose from the poverty of Birmingham's industrial slums. Life was tough, jobs were scarce, and young men often turned to crime to survive. These gangs started small, fighting over territory, pickpocketing, and running scams. But the Peaky Blinders grew into something much larger. They became known for illegal betting, robbery, smuggling, and protection rackets. Shopkeepers and pub owners who didn't pay them could expect broken windows, smashed furniture, or worse. Their names spread quickly across Birmingham. Soon, even the police struggled to contain their reach. The Peaky Blinders weren't just feared for their violence, they were feared for their control. Whole districts of Birmingham were under their power, and ordinary people often avoided crossing their paths. The gang attracted hundreds of members, mostly young men in their teens and 20s, who saw crime as the only way to escape poverty. They carried knives, brass knuckles, and clubs, and their favorite method of intimidation was beating rivals in public, sending a message to everyone watching. But even in their brutality, the Peaky Blinders were remembered for their unusual sense of fashion. They wore tailored jackets, silk scarves, and those trademark peaked caps. In the city of soot and factory smoke, they stood out as both dangerous and stylish, a mix that later inspired novels, films, and television for the poor families who suffered under their control. Though there was nothing glamorous about the Blinders' rule, it was fear, plain and simple. Their decline came in the early 20th century, when tougher policing, new laws, and the rise of rival gangs began to break their control. The Birmingham Boys, another powerful group, eventually overtook them, leaving the Peaky Blinders a fading name in the city's criminal world. By the 1920s, the gang that had once ruled the streets was mostly gone. Their members, arrested, dispersed, or simply grown too old for the brutal life of street fighting. Yet, their legacy remains powerful. More than a century later, the Peaky Blinders are remembered not just in history books, but in popular culture. The TV series gave them new life, but behind the fiction lies a real gang who built their empire on violence, fear, and the desperation of poverty. The real Peaky Blinders may have vanished from Birmingham's streets, but their story reminds us how gangs can rise, dominate, and eventually fall, leaving a legend that lasts far longer than their crimes. Asterisk. Case 7. Burger Bar Boys. Birmingham's Deadly Red Army in the 1990s. Birmingham's streets were ruled by a gang known as the Burger Bar Boys. They earned their name from a fast food joint in Handsworth, but their reach extended far beyond burgers. The gang was notorious for its violent turf wars, particularly with the rival Johnson crew. The conflict between these two gangs escalated into one of the most infamous events in Birmingham's gang history. On January 2nd, 2003, a tragic incident occurred when two teenage girls, Letitia Shakespeare and Charlene Ellis, were killed in a drive-by shooting outside a hair salon in Aston. The shooting was a case of mistaken identity, part of the ongoing feud between the Burger Bar Boys and the Johnson crew. The murder shocked the nation and highlighted the deadly consequences of gang violence. The Burger Bar Boys were involved in various criminal activities, including drug trafficking, illegal firearms distribution, and violent assaults. They were known for their ruthless tactics and had a reputation for not hesitating to use violence to maintain control over their territory. The gang's influence was widespread, and their criminal enterprises were deeply entrenched in Birmingham's underworld. The police response to the Burger Bar Boys was swift and determined. In 2005, 4 men associated with the gang were convicted for the murders of Letitia and Charlene. Marcus Ellis, Michael Gregory, Nathan Martin, and Rodrigo Sims were sentenced to life imprisonment. The convictions were a significant blow to the gang and served as a warning to others involved in similar criminal activities. Despite these convictions, the legacy of the Burger Bar Boys continues to affect Birmingham. The gang's influence has left a lasting impact on the community, and the effects of their actions are still felt today. The tragic deaths of Letitia and Charlene serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of gang violence and the importance of community efforts to prevent such incidents. 4. More information and visual content related to the Burger Bar Boys and their criminal activities. You can refer to the following resources. Case 6, Sabini Gang, London's Racecourse. King's Inn, the early 20th century. London's racecourses weren't just places for horses, they were battlegrounds for control between rival gangs. At the heart of this struggle was Charles Darby Sabini, a British-Italian gangster who led the Sabini Gang, born in 1888 in Clockwell, London. Sabini rose from a rough upbringing to become a feared figure in the city's underworld. His gang, often referred to as the Little Italy Gang, was notorious for its control over racecourse protection rackets. These rackets involved providing protection to bookmakers in exchange for a cut of their earnings. Sabini's men would ensure that bookmakers could operate without interference lest they paid up. This system was highly profitable and allowed Sabini to expand his influence across London's racing scene. The Sabini Gang's reach extended beyond the racetracks. They were involved in various criminal activities, including extortion, theft, and operating nightclubs. Their influence was bolstered by alliances with Italian and Jewish bookmakers, which helped them fend off challenges from rival gangs like the Hoxton Mob and the Cortese brothers. Sabini's gang was known for its use of violence to maintain control. They imported Sicilian gunmen and were infamous for their razor attacks, a brutal method of intimidation that left lasting scars on their victims. Despite their power, the Sabini Gang faced significant challenges. The rise of rival gangs, such as the Birmingham Boys, led by Billy Kimber, led to violent conflicts. One notable confrontation was the Epsom Road battle, where 23 members of the Birmingham Boys were arrested, temporarily weakening their influence. However, the Sabini's dominance was not to last. In 1940, with the outbreak of World War II, Sabine was arrested at Hove Greyhound Stadium and interned as an enemy alien. Despite his mixed parentage and inability to speak Italian, his internment led to a loss of authority in London's criminal underworld. After his release in 1941, Sabini's influence waned. In 1943, he was convicted of receiving stolen goods and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The post-war period saw a shift in London's criminal landscape, with new figures like Alf, White, and Jack Spot rising to prominence. Sabina's empire crumbled, and he spent his final years away from the limelight, passing away in 1950. The legacy of the Sabini gang endures in London's history. Their story is a testament to the volatile nature of organized crime and the ever-changing balance of power within it. For more information and visual content related to the Sabini gang and their criminal activities, you can refer to the following resources. Case 5, Hackney Defense Regiment. Plymouth's teenage terror in the mid-2000s. A group of teenagers from Hackney, a suburb in Plymouth, formed a gang that would become infamous across the UK. The Hackney Defense Regiment, HDR, founded around 2003. The HDR quickly gained a reputation for terrorizing their local community. Their activities ranged from petty crimes like shoplifting and graffiti to more serious offenses such as assault, robbery, carjacking, arson, and even sexual crimes. The gang's influence spread across Hackney, West Park, Whitla, and other parts of Plymouth. With an estimated membership of about 50 individuals, the HDR's rise to prominence was marked by their blatant disregard for the law and their community. They would often meet on the footbridge to engage in violent confrontations with rival groups, such as the Whitla Mental Mafia. These public displays of aggression instilled fear among local residents and showcased the gang's willingness to use violence to assert dominance. Their criminal activities were not limited to street-level offenses. The HDR was involved in more organized crimes, including drug trafficking and violent assaults. Their notoriety grew to the point where they were dubbed one of the most feared teenage gangs in the United Kingdom. However, the gang's reign of terror began to unravel in the late 2000s. In 2008, a concerted effort by local law enforcement led to the arrest and conviction of several senior members. The leader of the gang, Nathan Danvers, was sentenced to prison in 2008. Other members received non-custodial sentences, though many were later incarcerated for separate crimes. Between 2008 and 2009, many senior members were charged, and the gang was reported to be becoming a more sophisticated crime syndicate. The police crackdown was effective in dismantling the HDR in 2009. Several members were served with antisocial behavior orders, ASBOs, barring them from associating with each other. These legal measures, combined with the arrests, fragmented the gang and significantly reduced their activities. Detective Inspector Matt Lawrence of Plymouth Police stated, "I believe we have sounded the death knell for the Hackney Defense Regiment." By 2011, the last reported crime attributed to the HDR was recorded, marking the end of their criminal activities. The decline of the Hackney Defense Regiment serves as a stark reminder of the impact that youth gangs can have on communities and the importance of law enforcement in addressing such issues. For more information and visual content related to the Hackney Defense Regiment and their criminal activities, you can refer to the following resources. Case 3-67 Gang. Brixton's drill crew turned criminal infamy in the heart of Brixton Hill, South London. A group known as 67, pronounced 67, emerged in 2012, blending the raw energy of UK drill music with the realities of street life. Originally a music collective, quickly became notorious for their involvement in violent crime, including stabbings, shootings, and drug trafficking. Their rise was marked by the release of tracks like Let's Lurk, which garnered millions of views and featured collaborations with artists such as Giggs. Despite their musical success, the group's association with criminal activities led to increased scrutiny from law enforcement. The Metropolitan Police labeled 67 as a criminal gang, citing their involvement in organized violence and public disturbances. In response, authorities implemented measures to curb their influence, including shutting down performances using Form 696, a risk assessment tool aimed at preventing violence at live events. The group's notoriety reached a tragic peak with the death of Chris Kaba, a core member, who was fatally shot by police in 2022. This incident sparked widespread debate over police tactics and the portrayal of drill artists in the media. While some argue that drill music reflects the harsh realities of urban life, others contend that it glorifies violence and exacerbates gang culture. The case of 67 underscores the complex intersection of music, identity, and crime in modern urban environments. Case 2: Gun Brothers and the Bestwood Cartel. Nottingham's blood-soaked underworld in the early 2000s. Nottingham earned the grim nickname Shottingham due to a surge in gang violence. At the heart of this turmoil was the Gun family, led by brothers Colin and David, who controlled the Bestwood estate and surrounding areas through fear, violence, and crime. They were involved in drug trafficking, extortion, check fraud, and violent retribution. Their rule was marked by brutal acts, including the murder of 14-year-old Danielle Becken and jeweler Marion Bates. The brothers were known for their ruthless tactics, such as biting off rivals' lips and eyelids during confrontations. Despite their criminal activities, they were seen by some locals as protectors, resolving disputes and maintaining order in their communities. This complex relationship contributed to their lasting influence. Their reign ended with Operation Starburst, a large-scale police operation that dismantled their empire. Colin Gunn was convicted of conspiracy to murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison. His brother David, though involved in various crimes, was cleared of direct involvement in the murders, but had a history of violent offenses. The Gunn brothers' story serves as a stark reminder of the impact of organized crime on communities and the importance of law enforcement in restoring order. Case 1: Tottenham Turks versus Hackney Turks, a deadly turf war in North and East London. A violent feud between two Turkish gangs, the Tottenham Turks and the Hackney Turks, has led to over 20 murders in the past 2 decades. This conflict began in 2009 after an altercation at a snooker hall in North London, escalating into a brutal and ongoing gang war marked by shootings, stabbings, and revenge attacks. The Tottenham Turks, also known as the Boys, are primarily based in Tottenham, while the Hackney Turks, or Bombasiller, operate out of Hackney. Both groups are heavily involved in the heroin trade, vying for control of lucrative drug markets. Their rivalry has spilled over into Europe, with incidents in cities like Barcelona and Chisinau, Moldova, highlighting the international reach of their conflict. One of the most shocking incidents occurred in May 2024, when a 9-year-old girl was critically injured in a shooting outside a restaurant in Dalston, East London. The attack, carried out by gunmen on motorbikes, was intended for a rival gang member, but tragically struck the child instead. The incident underscored the indiscriminate nature of the violence and the deepening animosity between the two gangs. In July 2024, Izzet a senior member of the Tottenham Turks, was assassinated in Chisinau, Moldova, in what authorities believe was a revenge killing orchestrated by the Hackney Turks. This high-profile murder further intensified the conflict and drew international attention to the gang's activities. The feud has also involved political elements, with some members using their connections to influence legal and political outcomes. For instance, British lawyer Topher Hassan was arrested in 2024 for allegedly conspiring to murder Uwan, highlighting the extent to which the gangs have infiltrated various sectors. Despite numerous arrests and law enforcement efforts, the violence continues, with both gangs operating with increasing boldness. The Tottenham Turks and Hackney Turks remain entrenched in their deadly rivalry, leaving communities in fear and raising serious concerns about the effectiveness of current policing strategies. This ongoing conflict serves as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by organized crime and the challenges faced by authorities in combating such entrenched criminal networks. Lessons from England's most dangerous gangs, from the Molly Boys in East London to the Tottenham versus Hackney Turks feud. England's gangs share chilling similarities, control over territory, ruthless violence, and clashes with law enforcement. Some exploited music, some relied on intimidation, while others used fear to dominate neighborhoods. Their stories show how crime affects communities and leaves lasting scars. Which of these gangs shocked you the most? Could anything have stopped them sooner? If you found these stories eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Top 10 Universe for more real-life crime and underworld stories.